Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. I'm Birds View Politics, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down the recent Ukrainian advances following the launch of their offensive in the south and southeast, especially around Bakhmut and Zaporizhia. So let's get into it. First, we had news that Russia had supposedly launched a counteroffensive against the Ukrainians, but we really don't know much about it. We know that Russia has launched some counteroffensives around Bakhmut. Now, why is this significant? Well, Ukraine had made Bakhmut, along with some of the other smaller cities like Vuhledar, Mariivka, and others along this major front line, the front piece of their attack or defense, depending on how the day was going. And when Russia took Bakhmut, it immediately became a major defensive city. They turned it into a defensive frontline city so that Ukraine would not be able to retake it and then push through the rest of this post-2014, we'll call it, boundary line, because the 2014 boundary line, of course, was just north of Horlivka, and now Russia controls many of these other smaller cities such as Soledar, Bakhmut, nearby. Now, Ukraine has also been able to make some advances elsewhere. They claimed control over Marinka right here. They've claimed control over Adivka. We really don't know if they actually control these. They claimed control over Vodian earlier today. And they've also been making a lot of lesser known offensives in the south. But once again, we really don't know the full extent of their gains because these are happening live and we don't have access to that at all times. Additionally, we know that Ukraine has made some significant advances in this region right here, Zaporizhia, and also southwestern Donetsk. And this is important because, unlike elsewhere in the front line in Zaporizhia and southern Donetsk, the railway is pretty far away. There's one main railway that goes from Horlivka down through Donetsk and over to the city of Volnovka, and over to Razivka and through the rest of the cities down here. And then it later goes up back into Ukrainian-controlled territory all the way to the major city of Zaporizhia. Now, Ukraine supposedly is making offensives here to try and get to the railroad, but I don't think they're doing that. I think they're just trying to take as much territory as possible and make it as difficult for the Russians to defend, because what the Ukrainians are doing is they're trying to retake this city right here, Pavlivka. If they're able to retake Pavlivka, there are really no other major cities until you hit that railway. And Ukraine could take all the way up to the railway, and additionally, they could then move further south because their goal isn't actually the railway. The goal is to get to the Azov Sea down here. If you get to the Azov Sea, you take two major cities, Mariupol, Berdyansk, even a third, Melitopol. You also take some key naval bases, you take some key air bases, but most importantly of all, you cut off the Russian supply that goes from this railroad, from Donetsk, Luhansk, etc., all the way to the east to Melitopol and to the Russian forces in Kherson. If they're able to cut the land route, as I've said previously, then Russia would be able to be stuck, essentially throwing their forces from Rostov all the way on the east, down here, through Kerch, which we already know Ukraine has hit that bridge many times, and up through Crimea. And Ukraine looks ready, at least before the Russians blew a major dam in the area, to attack from Kherson over into Kherson Oblast, the Russian-controlled areas of it. If Ukraine were to take Kherson and they were to take Melitopol, these Mariupol, the other major cities of the, we'll say, pre 2014, where Russia didn't take those, then we would really be seeing Putin forced to negotiate, because Putin is not going to sit there while Russia loses territory. He'll either A, have to escalate or double down, possibly through the use of some tactical nuclear weapons, possibly chemical weapons, possibly even more airstrikes, although even there the Russians are running out of ammunition. So it's really unlikely that Russia would be able to defeat Ukraine through airstrikes or just conventional forces. We've already seen them fail to do that. More likely, I think, is Ukraine would negotiate where the 90% ethnic Russian Crimea stays with Russia, basically a Pyrrhic victory. Putin can say, well, look, I took Crimea, and Ukraine would be able to get back at least these two oblasts right here, Melitopol Oblast, seeing where my cursor is, and Kherson Oblast, or what's left of the Russian-controlled areas of it on the east bank. And maybe you could even see Ukraine get control back over Donetsk and Luhansk, although that's a little bit more of an open question, especially southern Luhansk or southeastern Donetsk, which were already under Russian or Russian proxy control since 2014. So that's really, right now, the state of the southern and southwestern front, as well as the geopolitical status right now. However, we also have other news from other fronts, especially in the north. In the north, we've had continued fighting between the Ukrainians trying to take this last remaining Russian-controlled city in Kharkiv, and we've also had a lot of fighting near this main industrialized area of Western Luhansk. And this is, once again, one of the main issues for Ukraine is trying to break through heavily industrialized areas when they really don't have that many weapons to attack it. It's very hard to take heavily industrialized, heavily urbanized areas relative to how easy it is to just roll through plains. Because once again, Ukraine and Russia both rely on armored vehicles and supply convoys to get to their next destination, and it's a lot harder to do that when you're fighting house to house or street to street, as much of the fighting was. Especially, we have seen that with the Russians trying to take Bakhmut, which has been super costly for them. But we also saw earlier in the war when the Russians took Mariupol in the south, we had like a 300-day siege. Russia had huge issues, supply issues, trying to take the city, and this was mostly due to it being an urban center. Then really would not be an issue when you are trying to break into either central Ukraine, especially once you get past this major railway line between Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. If you can get to the west of that, if you're Russia, it's very easy to take that. On the flip side, if Ukraine can get through this railway line right here and take the all the way to the Azov Sea, it's a lot easier to take southern Donetsk. It's easier to take all the rest of very not industrialized areas in Melitopol and in Kherson Oblast, and even in Crimea, which once again has seen almost its entirety of its urban centers concentrated near the coast, which means that all the interior, especially the path straight through it from Ukraine, in Kherson itself, that is going to be a lot easier to take should Ukraine ever be able to get through. However, we do know that not all is going to plan for Ukraine, because while Ukraine probably expected pretty high casualties, I don't think they expected the casualties that the Russians are giving them, because while they're still rolling over, the Russians still making huge advances, especially in the south and in Zaporizhia and in southern Donetsk and even near Kharkiv, and also in Bakhmut. We've also seen the Russians post videos basically attacking the Ukrainians, saying, look, we've taken, especially they released a video talking about how they've taken Ukrainian controlled but German given Leopard tanks. We also had Bradleys from the United States that the Russians had clearly captured, and the Russian videos, whether faked or not, they definitely had them, and they even showed the Ukrainians having their engines still on as they were running to get out of the tanks. And once again, that part of it could be fake, but we definitely know the Russians have taken those tanks, those equipment from Ukraine, and Ukraine really needs those. And so if Ukraine is going to continue this offensive, they're going to need a lot more support militarily, but more importantly, they're going to have a lot of combined arms. That's something that Russia has really struggled with, and it's something that Ukraine, at least in the early stages of the war, was very good with. Russia, for a long time now, has sent in infantry without tanks. They've had airstrikes followed by no attack. They've had tanks without infantry or airstrikes. And Ukraine, throughout the war, has been really good at combining all three of those major things. They've had their airstrikes followed by tanks, followed by infantry, and or some combination of the three. And it's really helped them, especially if you saw in Kharkiv or in Kherson, the Ukrainians were able to do rapid breakthroughs, take a lot of territory very quickly, and this was because the Ukrainians were effectively able to use their combined arms offensive doctrine, which was very effective. Now, when Ukraine looks towards the south, where it's a lot more mountainous, or they look towards the, I guess, southeast, where it's a lot more urbanized, the Ukrainians are going to struggle a lot more, because your airstrikes, while they might be important, they're not going to be as important, and they're not going to be as effective. Tanks are not going to be as strong against actual full-on buildings as they are when they're just rolling over plains, and infantry themselves, while they're definitely better, um, in these urbanized centers, the one major strength of the Russians is simply the number of people they have. In the army, they keep on having mobilizations. They're probably going to have another one very soon as this war goes on, and as this offensive goes on. And Russia also has been able to recruit sizable numbers of mercenaries, especially the Wagner Group, most infamously. And these mercenary groups are fighting for the Russians, and they're not really caring about the casualties they're taking, although the generals who lead them definitely have a lot to say about the Russian general staff. So, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.